Okay, so agree or disagree, battle of the sexes. I have with me, what's up? What you
Here we
got?
go.
Okay. Oh my goodness, my volume is all over the place. Okay, so we've got Cole. Y'all, I guess the first episode's not even. Shut up. The first episode's not even out yet. But so the one thing that I really like about having people on a podcast is I'm really bad with compliments. And so when I had Tanner and Cam on, it was my opportunity, when introducing them, to be complimentary. So Cole has been one of my absolute best friends. He's been one of the people most instrumental in my own walk with Christ. He is one of the most he's one of the most fun people I know. He's one of the most unapologetically himself people I know, and he just generally kind of takes life with the perfect amount of seriousness, and is someone, in addition to being one of the people I'm most close to, probably one of the people I look up to the most. So Cole, you don't deserve any of those, but that's Cole. Okay, Cole, you want to say hi? Pass the mic over. Okay.
That's mine.
Yes, and I look down at Nick.
Okay. We also have Alli. Alli is one of my closest friends from college. I think Alli is someone I really look up to. First of all, we've got obviously 3 women here that are all women in engineering. So all of y'all I really admire just with y'all's career choices and how dedicated y'all are with your jobs. Alli, I think one of your biggest strengths is you just do a really great job of prioritizing other people. And so whether it's hosting people or whether it's just being invested in your home group at Watermark or just doing something like that, you do a really good job of investing in other people and prioritizing other people. And she keeps herself super, super busy. And so I admire all of that. And so, yeah, Alli, hello.
Hello.
Nice, okay. We're going to get better at this whole intro. Maybe I'll run an outline at some point. Okay, now we have Maddie, and Maddie's also, we all studied abroad together, which is cool.
Sure.
Maddie's one of my friends from college as well. Maddie is actually probably the most impressive person at the table, in that she works a full...
Keep going, Nick, please.
Yeah. She works a full-time job, and she also teaches yoga on the side, and she's just killing it at her work. And so Maddie, I just look up to you because you are also Cole, unapologetically yourself, and you're just super dedicated and good at what you do, and you put a lot of time into it. And so that is something that...
A boss lady.
Yeah, exactly. And so she does a great job, and I'm really excited to get her opinion on a lot of these topics, because I think she has a lot to add to that conversation.
Half of this podcast episode is just going to be us laughing.
Yeah.
For sure.
Until we argue.
Thanks, Nick. That was sweet.
I'm Maddie.
Does Emily get, oh my goodness, that's too much pressure. I saw the look at, what do I get?
Yeah, what is my intro?
Do you get a shorter introduction since you're my wife? How does that work?
Say what comes from the heart, man.
Okay, well, Emily obviously is my absolute best friend. She's one of the people that I admire most out of everyone, which is why I chose to marry her. She has a bunch of great qualities, but she is...
No, I thought you were going to go into, but she has some bad qualities too.
Yeah, she kind of sucks sometimes. No, she's one of the most joyful people I know. Like Alli, she is really good at hosting. If y'all only knew just the amount of effort she puts in, when people are coming over and get the house ready. She has more degrees than I do, and so she's smarter than me, and just generally more
okay,
yes, she's more organized than me. She's one of the people who kind of a lot of at the same stage in my life, like Cole in college. She on so many levels helped get me on track, and just hold me accountable in ways that were just awesome. And so I think she's beautiful, I think she's smart, I think she's a ton of fun. And so
I want to be on the podcast every week.
She only
Just for a little boost.
She only gets that once, because she may not be on the podcast that much, because she prefers actually doing all that work behind the scenes.
Yes. I don't prefer to be behind the microphone.
Okay, so.
And our dogs are barking. Yay.
Our dogs are barking. Yeah, we can probably let them out now. I just didn't want them to kill Chris. Oh, that's irrelevant to anyone listening to the podcast, because anyway. So topic of this week is just a generic battle of the sexes, and so I had sent out just a big list of potential topics. Were there any of those? Did any of those topics just stand out? It's do y'all want to start anywhere specific?
Why are you looking at me?
Maddie's the prepared one, so we'll start with her.
I am not prepared.
We can start with women.
And that's the first win for the men.
There you go. Make sure you have a mic, 'cause I don't know how much it'll pick up. You're pretty loud.
Just repeat it.
Okay. And Cole said, and that's the first win for the men.
You didn't send me the list, just FYI.
I've got the list right here. Also.
Okay.
So we
might
can
just
start
take
with
either.
women being defective or women having an extra layer of skin if we want.
I'll start with skin.
Yeah, we'll start with
I'm gonna let Cole take point on that one because that's his thing.
Extra layer of skin?
Yeah, isn't that your thing?
I don't know.
He's gonna be
I'm
squishy.
trying to think about this. I mean, I guess I think you guys have an extra layer of skin. I think I've heard that, but other than that, I don't really have a.
Like physically?
like actual.
The backstory here is that when Cole first met Emily, he would just walk up and be like, "Oh, you're so squishy," and like pinch her on the arm, and Emily's like, "What?" And Cole's like, "Yeah, you have an extra layer of skin," which I don't think is true, but.
Yeah.
I've never fact checked that.
Cole's like, can we cut that out?
Edits.
We're not posting this episode.
Okay. So
No, I honestly don't. I don't know. Yeah.
Okay. So what are the main topics? So we're talking about
Well, I was
the
gonna say.
differences between men and women, what we think the differences should be. Are there supposed to be differences? Should we be fully equal in everything we do? Or what topics are we doing?
Cole, did you see anything that stands out?
I was gonna look.
Okay, so the first thing that I had just written down, and
Yeah.
it doesn't make it like highest priority, but the first thing I've written down is I guess this can be in the workplace, this can be anywhere.
Oh,
but-
I like this one.
Okay, what you got?
I like this one because it is a challenging statement. Where are men in today's culture generally falling short?
I like that one too.
Where are men falling short?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Specifically
Men.
calling out men.
Yeah.
Okay.
You may not be getting picked up, by the way. But so Cole, you got the mic. So where you'll lead it?
Oh, where
where
else? Okay. I think for me, I think a lot of men sometimes aren't taking a leadership role. At least I feel that way. That I'm not saying that women can't do that at all. It's just I think it's important. Sometimes I feel like men don't. Like for example, I'm going to use your college example. You mentioned that Emily became a real strong point in your life, but it took her to do that, which I think is obviously a good thing. It always takes someone to push you.
Mm-hmm.
But why do men have to do that all the time?
Yeah.
Like why do we have to be so reliant on stuff like that? At least that's.
No, yeah, I agree. Something that my friends and I talk about. I am the only single person at the table, so I get to speak into this a little bit more. But whenever it comes to like relationships, for example, and dating, there is a lot more passivity in the men in our lives. If any of you are watching, it's fine. And so it can get very frustrating whenever you, especially plugged in at a church, whenever you see examples of men in the Bible and they are leaders and that's what they're called to be, and you just don't see it. Or you see it in some aspects but not others, and that's something that I want. I'm a strong leader and I want one.
Yeah.
And so I would agree. Cool. Here you go.
You don't have to have an opinion. You don't have to.
Yeah.
You know.
And for men falling short,
Yeah.
let's go.
Yeah, you're
Let's break it out.
I think in general, there's been a swing towards, how do I say that? I don't know the word I'm looking for. Femininity, maybe?
Yeah.
That I think that's not necessarily needed. I think that it's fine in some, but I don't think every guy needs to be feminine, if that makes sense.
So I have a question for that.
Okay, go ahead.
So
What you got?
this will. Okay, so this is interesting. This sparks an interesting thought in my mind. Like this femininity. What is femininity? Right?
Well, I don't know what femininity is.
Whatever.
I don't know
Whatever.
what femininity is.
Feminism, right?
Okay,
So
Debo.
if I'm a guy who likes pink, what if I'm just a guy who likes pink? I can still be a leader.
Mm-hmm.
So I just think stuff like that, like sometimes cultures define feminism, but
Yeah, I wasn't necessarily stating that like a feminine guy is not okay. I was just thinking that nowadays I think that more of it is trying, you know how like a lot of times in culture the scales will swing way heavy on the other side just to kind of even it out, whether it's women's rights, anything in culture. Like it swings one way just to like even out where there's a deficiency, I guess. I was saying that I understand that that's typically how history is and needed, but I don't know how to fix that, but I don't necessarily agree, like really pushing that into like the thought process. Like, you know what? Like we are gonna be feminine guys and we don't necessarily need to be like leaders. The women can be the leaders, boss leaders, like all that. I'm like, yeah, that's fine, but we don't need every instance in that case.
Yeah, and so
I agree.
I'm surprised because and this is totally just like slanted by my like opinion, is I feel like culturally, most of the time, like when culture says like, hey, like where are men falling short? It typically like it's men are too aggressive, or men are too like sex obsessed, or men are too domineering, or men are too controlling. And so I was expecting at least someone to say that. So I think in a lot of ways, I think I would agree. Where it's like I think there's always going to be some of that, but I think it's almost the other way. Where it's like there's almost more passivity than aggression. And so then as a follow-up question is, I don't think either one's better, but what are do y'all think there's more passivity or aggression where men like fall short? And like what are kind of the drawbacks of each one? Or like if that doesn't do it for you, then we can do something else.
Yeah, I think you can have both in the world because there's like 1 billion people in the world. And so no one's gonna make the headlines or the media, or even like no one's even really gonna stand out in my mind unless they aren't in an extreme to some point. Mm-hmm. And so yes, I see both. I see the passivity in the guys that I'm like, why don't you just freaking ask my friend out? And that annoys me. And then I see the aggression of others and I'm like, please chill. Yeah. And so like whenever it comes to a right amount, I want what I would want out of a guy. And I feel like that's kind of the weird spot where it's like, oh, I would probably want this out of a female too. I want somebody that's even keeled. I want somebody that's kind and direct. I want somebody that's assertive and I'm not gonna walk all over, and I also want somebody that's not gonna walk all over me. Mm. And so it's like, I don't care what gender that is. That's just the friend that I want. That's a coworker that I want. That's the neighbor that I want. That's the boss that I want. Somebody that's kind and assertive and direct and gonna like be nice.
Okay.
And I don't think you have to have either passivity or aggression in that. Like,
probably a good balance.
Yeah.
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 But I think kind of what like I was thinking from like what you were saying, Em, was that like we have like one extreme, and then I guess girls are like, no, we need this more from you, and then you get the opposite extreme, I guess. But so I guess kind of what you were saying, it's like trying to find that balance. I think that women need to be leaders in their like everybody has different strengths. So it's like we were talking about relationships, I can speak for my relationship, but it's like I have different strengths than Jordan, my husband, has different strengths. So it's like I need you to be a leader in those strengths and just as the same as the other one. So if you're expecting, like if I'm expecting him to do everything, like that's a disservice to him and others as well.
Yeah.
That's kind of what I was thinking.
Yeah, that was well said.
So to add to what Emily was saying, I think feminism, like I was thinking like, I think sometimes guys, like with like TV ads and stuff like that, like to me, like a lot of times you see like men on TV ads, like what are they? They're like the dumb idiot who doesn't know what he's talking about. Like that is what society views men. I mean, because it's plastered all over the media, which honestly sucks sometimes because it's like, I don't think, I mean, some are, okay, like let's just be honest, you can't just say, but in my experience, I don't feel like most like that. They're just either lazy or they're not being pushed the right way or helped the right way, like what we were talking about earlier. So I don't know. I think that's something I see.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I think you had said something I wanted to follow up on, but instead of doing that, as a follow-up, where are the biggest areas or we can, two options. Either, what is one thing that men in general are currently doing well, or how are women, like, in general, currently falling short? You know, either place, if y'all want to.
Okay. Am I good?
Sure.
Okay, I think that sometimes I think it's always easier to criticize yourself or like your group, I guess, than it is the other way around. I don't know, but I guess I was thinking women can fall short in the fact that we're like, we do everything, like get it together, like, and I think that's kind of happens a lot. So I think trying to be a little bit more humble, and like if you're needing more leadership or more intention from like your partner, then that's not always, I guess, the best way to take it, and I'm guilty of that sometimes too. So.
Same. I literally said that today.
Yeah, for sure. I mean,
Emily did backpack the team today, though. Good on you.
Yeah. I think it's either like the pride and thinking that I can do everything, or it's the thinking that I have to do everything since I'm not married, or since I believe whatever is said about me that I need to be all that in a bag of chips because I am a female and I'm a leader and I'm single and so I have to go get it.
and there's
And
definitely
so
that
it's-
persona.
yeah.
You should be that way because you're like strong, independent woman.
Yeah. And so whenever that comes in the picture and that thought process comes in the picture, so does pride. And then on the flip side of pride is insecurity. And so it's like I'm either sitting in one extreme or the other of like, oh, I totally have this, or I have nothing in the world and I'm like, what am I doing here?
Yeah, and so, do you have anything?
No, you go ahead.
Well, man, I don't know where I want to take this. I don't want to get too far off topic, but I want to like stay on that sort of. So you're like talking about this idea of like strong, independent woman, and obviously I'm talking to 3 women who are, again, like y'all are all in engineering, y'all are all doing very well in y'all's respective careers. Is there too much emphasis like placed on that though? Do you think?
I'm
Like, are
not
there-
independent.
Like,
I'm dependent. Not a good thing, but.
But then like even tied back to like the one thing like you had said earlier is you talk about how like, hey, whether it's a guy or a girl, I kind of want the same thing like in approach. And like even that, where it's like in my mind, it's like, okay, well are there fundamental differences by and large, not in every particular case, but as a generic rule, are there fundamental differences between guys and girls, or like, does that make sense? Like, so both of those things where it's like, it almost like, to me, culturally a lot of times, it seems like we're trying to make men and women almost just like the same thing. Whereas like, and again, this is weird. I come from a family where like my mom is very much, she is like very much intimidating, very much like in charge and in control and very smart. Like she's still working and doing really well. But it's like some women are capable of that. Just like you said, just like there are men that are more sensitive, etc. But like by and large, is there a distinction? If that makes sense? I don't want to get too far away from the mic.
I'll go ahead and answer that. So I think I think they're definitely, we are wired differently. If anyone's been married, which most of us are here, sorry. If I've learned anything in my small little time of marriage, is
Small. You're the most senior person here.
compared to most people in the world, it's very small. So women just think very differently than men, which is not like, I'll give you an example. There's a good thing about that too.
No, yeah.
And one of those things like that I recall is I remember we got Charlotte, our dog, and she was like 2 months old or whatever. And I was like, okay, like just told her to sit and not bark or whatever, and she was like, she did it. She didn't do it. And I was like, I told you like 10 times, why are you not doing it? So I went to like get on to her, and Morgan's like, she's 2 months old, she doesn't get it. And it was just like one of those things, like guys are very just like, why is this not just happening? You know, we
How
want
can you
things,
fix it?
right? And she had the empathy and compassion to recognize that when I didn't. So like, there's stuff like that that I think we just think differently. But then also there's times where, in my opinion, that empathy can play too much in like a woman's role, where it's like almost too irrational, and that like.
Don't giggle.
and that can be like, I don't have an example for that one, but it's just, to me, that's where like I see us very differently, that I can see that thing. It's almost like, I don't want to say logical, because I don't think it's 100% that, because sometimes illogical decisions, like why isn't Charlotte sitting, you know, that's still like, it's because she's 2 months old, she doesn't get it, you know. It's like, it may not be logically right, but that's how life is. And so it was good for like someone to bring that to my perspective. So I don't know. Hope that makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I'd say for me, I think it's almost two different things that you're asking. So the first question was better or worse, aggression or passivity. And I said, why can't we all be kind, but also direct? And then the second one is like, which one is like better suited for men or women, or like, are men and women different? And the answer is yes. We are wired differently. And there's the emotional side of it. There's the side of it that's just biological. Like, women will bear children biologically, and so they're mothers in general. And so it's like the emotions, the way that you think, like we're nurturers, we're helpers, biblically apologize. And then men are leaders. And not that women can't be leaders, and not that men can't be nurturing, but that is just kind of like the way that we are, right? And so whenever it comes to people are wired differently, the answer is yes, men and women are wired differently. Shocker. And so whether you believe that's like from a biological standpoint, a biblical standpoint, I don't know where you listener stand.
All three of them?
All three. And so I would go with yes.
We have a dog. We have a dog.
And I don't think that's a bad thing. And I do think there's things where it's like, yeah, I think it's the beauty of marriage, the way that you learn from each other, the way that Emily or Morgan or Maddie isn't siloed to just be nurturing, and Jordan and Nick and Cole aren't siloed to just be the stereotypical like suburban like working dad that like you never see because they're out earning money.
Yeah.
Like, there's things to learn on both sides.
Mm-hmm.
And there are natural gifting on both sides.
Yeah.
So it's how to utilize both and grow together in that way. And then I guess as a single person entering that like picture, I think that's something where I struggle with, where it's like, okay, single doesn't mean I'm half of a human. It means that I'm whole as I am, especially in Christ. And so how do I not have it all, but how do I recognize that my leadership is in Christ, but also that he's gifted me in ways that it's like, okay, I can be a leader.
Yeah.
And I can both be nurturing.
Yeah.
And so like, how does that all wrap into one thing until somebody else steps into the picture and is like, hey, now let me shepherd you well.
I like that. That was great.
That was really good.
Okay, I follow that.
But okay, so it's I guess a little bit different. I was also thinking about like, and you like kind of brought this up as well. Like, I think sometimes culturally, women and men can be put in like kind of like a stereotype or a bubble, like leaning into that like nurturing. So like stick to the nurturing, and leadership, so stick to the leadership. And I think that a part of that, like a lot of it is like the way we are wired, but I think also a lot of it is culturally, because I mean, if you look, I mean, the past 10, 20 years, like 20 years ago, we getting 3 women engineers in the same room, pretty unlikely.
Yeah.
So, I mean, just using that as an example of what, like, culturally women have been able to do more and men have been able to do more than probably we would in the past. So, I think,
Do you guys, this kind of like brought another question, and I don't know if it's on your little list, but I just thought of like, do you guys specifically think that genders should have a specific role, first of all, in a relationship, second of all, just like in general? Like, for instance, my thought process was like work. Typically people are like, well, do you want kids? And then the first thing that'll also come in their mind will be like, are you gonna stay home with your kids? And like, do you think that's fine thought process? Do you think that like we should fight against that thought process and be like, why couldn't you stay home with kids kind of thing? Like, where do y'all stand on that?
And so, like, as you're passing, this I think relates to something you said, and this is probably one of the areas where we may have like the biggest disagreement, where it's like, even like you just said it, where it's like, even what's taken place over the last 20 years or so, like, is that progress or is that just change? If that makes sense. Like, for example, like I would sit there and say like, men or woman, you should have every opportunity to do whatever you want. However, like, then we can get into women engineering, etc. Like, that does not necessarily mean that there's going to be an equal outcome, and that doesn't necessarily, well, in my opinion, that doesn't necessarily mean there's going to be an equal outcome, and that doesn't necessarily mean we should force an equal outcome, because, like you said, the stereotype, I think a lot of people like rail against stereotypes, like, man, this is a horrible thing, but it's like, in my opinion, it's like a lot of stereotypes are stereotypes for a reason, in that they may fit 55%, 60% of that subgroup. And where it's like, again, I'm coming from a family where it's like, my mom, if you have like the stereotypical woman, if your idea of the stereotypical woman is stay at home, nurturer, like my mom very clearly didn't fit that. And so do I look at her and say like, oh, that's horrible, that's stupid? No, like for her, she clearly had, like, she is still finding success in work. And so like that is definitely, I'm glad that option is available, whereas like if you were to look back 100 years, that option may not be available at all. So it's like on the one hand, I'm like, it's good that option is available, but on the other hand, have we reached a point where if there's equal opportunity, like, are we, like, culturally or socially or whatever, are we like pressuring women to be more like men, and are we pressuring men to be more like women, and trying to just get this equal outcome that I would posit is not necessarily a good thing. What you got? And then we can, pass it. I wish we had more mics.
No, so I was gonna say two things. Well, first of all, I think a lot of my opinions are, the reason why I make my decisions are similar to probably why Alli's is scripturally.
Yeah.
Like why my role is defined is because I feel that I am commanded by God to be a certain way, right? Doesn't mean I can't do other things, but I do need to make sure I'm doing that one job that I have been asked. So, like, as long as I'm doing that job and I can do other things, that doesn't matter. So I would say the same thing for women. But I will say this, I can only really speak from experiences. And I will say, so growing up, right, like my parents were divorced. So growing up, my mom raised us, and so she worked at a big corporation that was super successful, kind of like you guys are. I always prided myself in that. Like, it was something I was extremely proud of, because she raised 2 kids from like 2 and 2 months. Like, that's how old me and my brother were, by herself. And basically, like, that was a good thing. But I will say this, in my dad's house, I had a stepmom and my dad, and they both worked. And so when my mom got married, I kind of saw this, my mom retired, I guess, if you want to call that. And she started being a housewife, if you want to call that, which is, I think, what y'all are looked down on for doing. I feel that society looks down on women for being that, which I think is a sad thing. I think it should be looked at either way. If you want to be a housewife, it should be okay. If you want to work, it should be okay. As long as you're fulfilling the role, like I said, that you're supposed to fulfill. And so that being said, like, I saw being in 2 different houses. When I would come home to my dad's house, which had 2 working parents, it was always extremely stressful. They were always fighting, which isn't on them. They weren't 100% fighting. I don't want to say it's extremely stressful, because I wasn't like stressed out of my mind.
Yeah, you're still.
I was just more like, it was much more peaceful in a home where somebody was ruling the home. That's like, and I think that's a problem with a lot of America's units, is their home isn't how it should be, and it doesn't necessarily have to be, like, those roles aren't being fulfilled at home. They're fulfilling them, those roles at work instead of home. And that's a big problem that I feel, and that could be men or women. But I think in society right now, we're losing the woman's role, which is so crucial in my mind. And I saw the benefit of it because like it was like such a blessing. It's like, you know, stuff that you don't even think about. Like I still help my mom with chores, but she'd have like dinner ready and groceries bought. And like at my dad's house, we would go there. We'd all go get groceries at like 6 p.m. and we would eat dinner at like 9 and be like tired and stressed. And so there's just stuff like that.
I forgot the question.
I forgot the question too. but
Question
I
was
was
just
just
to
gonna go.
reiterate, do you think there are roles?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think you had
Yeah.
specifically mentioned like, hey, like these stereotypes, like what do we do with them?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I guess just like going off of what you just said, like I just feel like it's a really difficult. I mean, I struggle with that too. I mean, like my parents both worked a lot, so it was always very busy, and I have a lot of brothers and sisters, so it was definitely very busy. And then like Jordan's family was more of that, I guess, traditional, where like his mom was home, so it was very much like a traditional, and so it was very different. And I don't know. I don't think either one is right or wrong. Like it's really something that. Like I know that that's something in the future that we're going to have to like decide, and it is very like kind of daunting because it's like I don't know, both ways it's very difficult. So I don't think that's a very good answer, but
No, it's Alli or Amy, you don't know about anything?
not daunting in the
No,
way about
yeah.
kids, but daunting in the way of like having to make that
No,
decision,
for sure, yeah, for sure.
the right decision, I guess, for your family.
Yeah, and I think one of the hardest things for me to balance is, okay, so at one point in the world, maybe that was like tradition, the way it was, however you would call it, where it's just like, okay, guy work, husband work, woman stay at home,
Yeah.
and that's fine. And I'm like for that. The families that both my parents work, similar things. And so I mean, I remember going to friends' houses where everything was like dinner was on the table, and I was like, wow, this is so fun. But then I looked at the way that my mom and my dad work, and I'm like, man, you fought for me so hard.
Yeah.
And so there's pros and cons to both. And I know for my family specifically, we couldn't have, not like the life that we live, like we had lived an extravagant life, like we couldn't get by without both parents working. And so that's just the way that the cards were dealt. And so I think that's a piece of it. I think another piece of it, whenever if I was taught since middle school to be a Proverbs 31 woman,
You're gonna have to break that one down for me.
you're welcome. So like
The
Proverbs,
perfect
the perfect woman,
Impossible.
like the impossible woman.
Yeah.
But she was a mother. She was a great mother. She was also a business woman. And so it's like whenever I see all those things, I'm like, oh, so not like it is an impossibility. Like you cannot have it all, especially in that proverb. But there's something to it where it's like, oh, that's something that could be. That's something that could be. And so it's how do you have the balance? And I think I was trying to remember where we got on this conversation of like, hey, like whenever you talk to employers and they're like, oh, we're thinking about like getting married. You're like, oh, when are you gonna have kids? Like, and in the back of their mind, like a conversation that I had with my boss, is like, yeah, like whenever you get married, like I would be nervous for whenever you have kids because I'm gonna be curious if
you're gonna stay.
if you're gonna come back.
Yeah.
And I'm like, that's a fair question, and I think that's a valid question because some people choose to come back, some people choose to stay home, and both are great options.
Yeah.
Whenever it comes to, both are great options in the parenthetical of like, hey, whenever you talk to your husband, whenever you talk as a family unit, hey, what's best for us? That's how you make that decision. I don't think it's a role that needs to be prescribed. I think Cole said it best of like, hey, like somebody needs to be taking care of the home. Like somebody needs to be taking care of the family unit, whether it's 2 people, whether it's 7.
Job
2
has to be
people and
done.
5 kids.
Yeah.
Yeah, the job has to be done. And so whether that's more of like an equal opportunity thing where it's like, tag teaming it and figuring it out, which is kind of what it was in my family. Hey, like, dad is home. Both my parents are nurses, so like their schedules were all over the place. So it's like, hey, dad is home and we're going to take care of the kids then, or hey, mom is home, or relying on like the nuclear family of like, okay, my grandparents lived across the street. Or whether it's, I don't know. I liked what you said about like somebody has to be taking care of it and not putting the pressure on just someone, because it's like, okay, if you're the wife, you're submitting to your husband's leadership, right? To a certain degree, however you like want to like discuss complementarianism and all those other things. I won't get into that right now. But if that's what we're supposed to like follow our husbands as the church follows Christ, then like it's on him too. It's not just on her, it's on him too. And so it doesn't.
It's most on him if you're talking about it.
Yes, and so I really appreciated. Yes, I really appreciated the way that you talked about it. Like, hey, things need to be taken care of.
Yeah.
And so, what does that look like?
Can I add in?
Yes,
come
Jordan,
on.
come
Get over here! Yeah.
You're like,
Oh
Take
yeah.
my seat.
Mo, you're up next.
Yeah, we have subs. We're bringing in
I
a
am
reliever.
Jordan, Maddie's husband. So for me, being, I feel like the minority of the group, and having my mom stay home at all times. So growing up was awesome. They made it specifically to where we never felt like we were ever in money trouble at all. Like, and it's not like it just wasn't that way growing up, because they could do it and they did it. It wasn't like, oh, we have to both be working to sustain our lifestyle. No, they cut back on their lifestyle to where they could, potentially grow their family. So, and no fault to anyone's other families. They just chose together to do this on their family. So, in a sense, it was awesome, because it was just really cool, like growing up, like with my sisters and my mom always being there. Like, I never had to like go through any kind of struggles that anyone else could go through, but I had my own struggles.
Yeah.
So that was cool about that. But then another thing was that y'all mentioned was financial stability, and that's why people are getting away from it now. I mean, like, how could you grow up now? Like, how could we all together grow a family, a successful family, with just one person working? I think that's a very hard lifestyle to live in this time versus the time before us. So that's another thing to think about. And then also, you mentioned the question about you in your workplace, and then your boss having the open space to ask you whether you can come back to work or not. I don't think that's fair, in the sense that they could potentially, and this is just human error, they could potentially mark you down for not a promotion that you could get, because they don't know what your future investment is in the company.
Yeah.
So I don't feel like it's necessarily...
That shouldn't be asked.
Yeah, it shouldn't be asked.
Yeah.
At the same day, at the same point, we're both going to work tomorrow. And we're both at work today. So yes, you can say, well, tomorrow's the future, but in a sense, like, do we go to contracts? Do we go to like, do we end up going to future points? But I mean, at the end of the day, that's just kind of a mindset that you have to get into and have an agreement and communication following up. So that's
I wanted to add something.
Yeah, go ahead.
Actually, do you have a question? Jordan, you may want to answer this too. So like, do you guys ever feel, so we've talked about the financial thing a lot, and that's a big thing for me. So thankfully, me and Morgan are extremely blessed. So like, I'm not in this boat, but it is a boat that I continually think about. I'm not saying like I'm wealthy. I'm just saying we're not like
Charlotte had all the pup toys she could dream of.
right now. God has blessed us. Okay, and but like that being said, sometimes I wonder if, for me, this is me myself, if I'm making the decision to have two jobs so that I can go on a ski vacation every week, which is what your parents, I think, cut back on or whatever, which is what you were thinking. It's like, So sometimes I think in American culture, right, it's like keeping up with the Joneses.
Yeah.
It's that mentality that we all feel like we gotta have the next best thing because our culture, we just have so much stuff. And like literally we're trying to get all that stuff and whoever has the most toys wins, like type of thing that you feel like because all your friends are getting like a new vehicle every month.
Yeah.
Like you feel like you gotta have 2 jobs so that you can do that too and so your kids don't feel, but it's like, in my experience, people who I've been around with, like older people who I've visited, me and Morgan have visited, like at our church, some of the poorest people have the coolest memories.
Yeah.
Like, and it's like, I don't know. So I don't know if you want to add something to that or if anyone else.
I kind of wanted to.
We gotta be careful, 'cause that's a whole 2-hour podcast on its own.
Yeah,
But no,
you could dive super
Yeah.
deep into that, but also I want to jump back to like the main question, like, would you want like the stereotypes of like the woman staying home and the man going to work and all that? I think it depends on like if the woman is stereotyped, like if people say that you look down upon the woman staying home and being a housewife, quotations. I think it just depends on what you do in your time and what your efforts put into. So if you are a housewife and you put 100% into being a housewife and you do a dang good job, even if you're not doing a good job but you're getting better, I think that should be rewarded. And I think we just have to change our mindsets in a collective group. I don't
You're
think...
saying it should be equal to be a house, it should be just as important to like be a housewife or like to stay home with your kids versus going to work.
If anything, I think it should almost
Yeah.
be viewed as better.
Yeah.
Like it's an almost like it is such a noble role in my opinion, because like you sometimes have to give up your passions or whatever it is to you have to give up.
Yeah, no one heard Cole's
Yeah,
wonderful.
sorry. Sometimes I think it's such a noble role. I think it's something that you guys have to give up your passions if you want to do that. Maybe
But you can do it.
Yeah, but I think like I said before, as long as you're doing that job, it doesn't mean that you can't. If you're doing that job well and you're working a job, doesn't mean you can't do both. But in my opinion, if that job is lacking, that's a problem. That's what I would say. So, and I would say the same thing goes for guys. It's like, if I'm not leading my family because I'm spending 60 hours at work to try to get the next Corvette or whatever, that's a problem. So.
Yeah. I guess it's like, as I think of it now, like I couldn't see myself like right now, like stopping working, like, but my priorities would shift, like obviously. So it's like, I guess I like what you were saying about like you need to make sure that the most important job that you have, you being like a mother and a father and a part of this family is first. And obviously your priorities shift, but
So this is awesome. This has been a great discussion. At the risk, I don't want to get off in the weeds necessarily, but I think it's sort of related. And Emily, you can chime in if there's. I think you'll know kind of where I'm going with this. But even that, or sort of on the topic of like stereotypes, and even there was like the comment of like, oh, that shouldn't even be asked, or like etc. Are women in general, are they more likely in the workplace to perceive slights than men, if that makes sense?
Perceive them or receive them?
So it could be both. And then so I guess that
I would say perceive.
Yeah, I would say perceive, because so I think everyone in the workplace, in my opinion, everyone in the workplace receives slights almost probably on a daily basis, probably multiple times a day. Are women by and large more inclined to then like take something that may be normal or across the board and say, oh, that's just unique to me? Like, for example, the reason I would, Emily and I have had this conversation a lot when we get home from work and stuff like that, but then, like my mom, I'm sure my mom faced a lot of hurdles that of course are unique to her being a woman, but none of those hurdles have hindered her in her career progression, because she just, whether they didn't register, whether they did register, and she just pushed through them. Like you said, you had mentioned, hey, this is a fair question, and I think I would agree, but it's like, of course that question is unique to a woman, because a woman is probably, again, in general, more inclined to be the person to stay at home. Not that there can't be vice versa. But I don't know, I'm getting all over the place.
Yeah.
But to dial it back in, are women more likely to perceive slights?
I'm curious to hear that.
Yeah. I can only speak from a female engineering perspective. And then I can only speak from Alli's perspective too, right? And so from Alli's perspective, I joke around a lot. My coworkers joke around a lot. It's a lot of like family. And so whenever it comes to slights or digs or sarcastic comments, I'm mostly unfazed.
Yeah.
Either I didn't miss them or it's I know a sarcastic comment was made at me, so I'm fair game to somebody else. Or I know a sarcastic comment was made to my coworker, so it's probably gonna come to me next. That's fine. I don't care, whatever. Whenever it feels, and I guess it's probably the perceived versus received question, whenever like jokes are made about me and I'm one of the few females on the team about me being somebody's secretary, I don't love that.
Yeah.
Dang.
And so whenever a comment is made about me in the workplace, whenever it's like not a typical role or maybe a more typical role, like the stereotypes of like, oh, are you a secretary? Are you somebody's assistant? Or things like that. I'm like, no, I work my butt off for this job. And I currently, it's like, I don't have a family to pour my life into, so it's like, I'm gonna do this job well.
Yeah.
And so please don't make that comment.
Yeah.
And I have stopped people on that comment. And so perceived, received, that's why I asked, because it's like, yes, I have received that comment before and I did not appreciate it. And I did perceive it as, I'm getting this comment because I'm a female.
Yeah.
And then the other side of it though, which isn't in the workplace, but this is something that I probably perceive more than it's actually true, is whenever I'm in a circle of people at like a young adults event and we're going around, okay, like say your name, where you're from, what do you do? A lot of my friends are civil engineers outside of you guys. Sorry, friends. And so we'll be going around the table and Cole will be like, hey, I'm Cole, I'm from Bryan, Texas, I'm a civil engineer. People are like, oh, that's awesome. Hi, I'm Alli, I'm from Gilmer, Texas, and I'm a civil engineer.
Wow.
Wow, oh my gosh, really? And I'm just like, that's fine, and that's probably the more perceived side than the actually like, oh, that wasn't meant to be a dig, and I think that's the perceived versus received side of things.
Okay.
It's not
Amen.
necessarily in the
Yeah.
workplace, it's in like just real life.
Okay. I know you all have more.
Go. I want to hear all the ladies.
Yeah.
I want to hear the ladies.
I mean, I
Even though we're
definitely
rushing to the
second
mic.
that second one as a real life thing. I mean, and that is kind of what I guess was thinking about, like from a cultural perspective from the beginning. Like that is a very real thing. Like when guys say they're an engineer versus a girl says they're an engineer, it's always like, wow, that's so impressive, or really, or like, and I would not have guessed that, or something like that, and all the time.
And it doesn't go the other way, where it's like,
Yeah.
I live in Frisco, which a lot of young adults are teachers, and it doesn't go the other way if Maddie's like, hi, I'm Maddie, I'm from Fort Worth, I'm a teacher. They're like, oh, that's awesome. And if Cole were to say, oh, I'm Cole, I'm from Bryan, I'm a teacher, they're like, oh, that's so cool. It's just me. And that's the perceived part, whether or not it's, I don't think it's intentional by any means, but it's like, oh, that's what I feel.
Yeah.
Yeah, so, sorry, I don't want to, I've got like, I could take this 10
I like this question.
Yeah,
This is a big question.
But hold on, I'll add a little bit of caveat to
Okay,
that.
let's do it.
Where it's okay, both my parents are nurses.
Yeah.
Whenever my dad says that he's a nurse, or whenever people ask me what work my parents do, and I'm like vague, oh, they're in the medical field, or oh, my dad works in a trauma ICU, oh, is he a surgeon? Oh, is he a doctor? I'm like, no, he's a nurse. And it's like the pride, like he is one of my all-time favorite people. Like he is the person one of the people that I admire most. And just like, I want to fight people when they're like, oh. And so it's like in the same way, but opposite, whenever people are like, wow, really? I'm like, gosh, I want to punch you.
Yeah.
And so it's like, it's not exclusive to me all the time, because it's like, that's what I grew up with, but flipped. And so there's caveats to it, of course, but it's like, oh, I don't like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Go for it, Maddie. Let's see it.
I think that was,
I mean, kind of going off what Alli was just saying, I think that's one of the things that, like, I am talking about raising our kids and stuff, like, that's one of the things that I think with the next generation, and I think definitely we've gotten a lot better, like, so much better, that I really don't think that we would have gotten the same opportunities, like, 20 years ago. However, like, I, like, want my kids to know that they can, like, if they're a guy, they can be a nurse. If they're a girl, they can be an engineer. Like, that should not be, like, a weird thing at all. Or a surprising thing to anybody. So that from an everyday thing, that's a pretty common thing. Fortunately, like, again, like Alli was saying, I can only speak from my own experiences, and on, like, as a professional, I don't really feel like I've gotten that much from being, like, a women engineer, since I definitely remember things, like, as I was going through college, and, like, when I decided to be an engineer, like, little comments that, like, stick with you, kind of, like, wow, Andrew said that, but, yeah, but, yeah.
That's so interesting.
I would like to add real
Okay,
quick,
yeah.
just real
Okay.
snippet. How old are these? Like, I hate that it happens to y'all on the stereotypes that y'all get in the workplace. But how old are these people stereotyping you? Because now we're coming into a world like we're taking over, and that stereotype is leaving. Like nurses, like they need men now because of the heavy lifting, and like of course women can do it too in like groups and numbers. But like being in the medical field, like. It's just one of those things where, like, you need a male nurse at some points in time because there are male patients and they're uncomfortable with female nurses.
No, I bet they're not. I bet they're not.
You'd be very, very, very surprised.
Yeah.
And I think to like seriously answer the age question, a lot of times it is the older guys.
Yeah.
But whenever you have the older guys at the office setting the scene, and it makes it okay for the younger guys to joke about it.
Yeah.
And I think that's where it's like, yes,
Peer
it is
pressure.
dying out.
From,
And it's like, yes, it's dying out. And I correct it real fast for the younger ones. And so, yes, 100% it's dying out, but it's still like, it's still gonna trickle through.
Yeah, I think,
Okay, yeah, go ahead.
sorry.
No, you're
No.
I think that the like outward comments are typically from like not this generation, but the shock, like those little things that I don't think, like I guess if we like go back to men falling short, like that's something I don't think that they realize. I think they think that they're like, oh wow, you're so smart, like that's impressive, and that's why they're saying it, and they don't realize that like you wouldn't have said that if like Jordan said he was an engineer.
So,
Most of the time.
man. Okay.
This is where we're different.
I wish we could just sit here and talk, like, because I want to circle back to like to all of these. Again, dang, I don't know. Do you have a place you want to take it?
Yeah, sorry, you were kind of.
No, go ahead first, and then
Well, I don't know where I want to take it. It's the thing.
Well, I was just gonna say this gets back to, in my opinion, that we are very different. Because in my mind, when somebody says I'm an engineer, I'm not, as a male, for me personally, I don't think twice about what anyone's saying. It's like, I'm an engineer, I'm a male, if they say wow, if they say whatever, like men just don't, we don't even register, man. It's just, you're pulling your box off the shelf, and there's nothing in it except I'm an engineer. And you're putting it back on the shelf. You know, and it's like, and that's why we get the dumb idea, right?
Yeah.
But in some senses, I think that's a great thing because you don't notice things and some stuff just goes past you. But I don't want to put to light that those things definitely are like, I mean, I will say women in the workplace as an engineer, there's definitely things. I don't want to say that there's not things, but some stuff I think, I use that one example as just an example. I'm not saying that's every time. There's definitely real things where, to me, that question that you brought up earlier, like, are you gonna have kids? Like, I would never ask that. That's just, I don't know. That's just not something that I think is fair to ask. Or
Well, like, what context would you ask that? Does that make sense? Like, I would ask if I'm just trying to like I don't know. If I'm at my best when I'm not just consumed with the work I'm doing, if I'm trying to like, all the time I'm like trying to think of ways to be more, like to get deeper with a lot of my coworkers. And so like, a lot of times that's like, oh, should I ask about their family? And so, I mean, we're laying it in context of, like what does that mean for your career? But, and that,
if I was her boss, I wouldn't ask that.
Personally or business-wise?
Yeah, if I'm like Allie's best friend and I sit next to her every day and we share Cheetos every day, whatever, and I'm like, she's like, so you about to have kids? And I'm like, yeah, what about you? Like,
so
yeah, I would ask that.
If you had, I'm trying to think, these analogies will suck. If you have, maybe you've got an office in Dallas and you've got someone who's from Florida or from Sacramento, would you not be like, as their boss, as far as like, and I'm specifically thinking from the civil engineering standpoint, if you're trying to plan out, I know, well, I'm not going to use employers. If you're trying to plan out like, hey, I know I've got this much work coming in over the next 6 months. I've got this much work coming in over the next year. Like, hey, how is this person doing in Dallas? Like, are they homesick? Like what are they going to volunteer that information to me? And then how do I budget for that? So does that make sense?
No,
I'm totally better analogy.
That's a great question. But in my opinion, what I've learned about the business world is life will go on. The company will spin. If she decides she doesn't want to show up next week because she wants to take care of her family, that is like, we're gonna find somebody and it's gonna keep spinning. And it may be a little blip and it may be uncomfortable, but it's still no place to just be like, let's make decisions because people may leave. Because in my opinion, the same thing could be done for me. Like, my mom could die or be put in a mental hospital and she's in Ohio and I have to leave and go get a job there. Yeah. But you're not gonna ask that, be like, how's your mom doing? So I can plan to, the same question applies to us. It could literally be any life event that changes somebody's role. And the companies have to be prepared to do that. That's what the company has to do. It doesn't have to be women's, if they're gonna get pregnant or leave. That's how I would address that as a manager.
Yeah. And I think there's wisdom to planning for the future and things like that and being prepared. Yes. I think out of that heart mindset and out of that, I would be concerned if that was my manager's heart behind that question, because that's a manager leading out of fear, not out of preparation. If he's leading out of preparation, then he should be talking to me about like, hey, who do you see around you that's going to replace you either when you move on or you move up, right? Yeah. Not out of fear of, oh, are they, yes, I am 2 hours away from my family. My boss doesn't sit in fear every day. Maybe she's going to move home. Or maybe she's going to move to a different location because she likes Denver or something. That's not a fear mentality. That's just life. Companies will move on. So how do you be prepared? And I would say, no matter what your role is, I'm training the person to sit in my seat next so I can either move up or move out. That's me being a good employee.
Yeah, and then so what if, again, this is really imperfect. You're training the person to take your job, and then say that person, the week before they're slated to take your job, then they drop out because they have kids, or they move, or they just don't like the job they're doing.
Yeah.
Like, all of a sudden now you've put your eggs in the basket of, oh, I've been preparing this person for the last year or 2 years or 3 weeks, and then now that also impacts. Like, does that make sense? Where it's like, I can see the perspective of like, I mean, even something as simple as like, I've had companies where it's just like at check-ins, like, hey, how's everything going? Like, and I don't sit there and I'm not sitting there saying like, hey, like, how dare they ask me like, am I enjoying this company, or like, what's going on, or if I'm stressed out? It's like, oh no, I understand them asking that, and then I can choose whether like how much I want to be honest with them or not. And my default is I'm gonna lay it all out there, and it'll probably screw up my career. But my thought, I don't ever view that as, I would prefer across the board that they ask those type of questions, because if I was in that position, maybe I'm bad at politics, maybe I'm bad at just like people, but in my mind, it's like, as a boss, that's the quickest and easiest way to find out, like, hey, what's going on in these people's lives? And I don't know, as a good boss, yeah, you should probably be super involved, but knowing probably what you've got on your plate, it's like, it's a lot to juggle. I don't know, yeah.
Yeah, and I think part of that, I would encourage you to work on your empathy. Of like, hey, if you're gonna ask people those questions, lead with vulnerability and recognize how not like how that makes them feel, as in like you're gonna hurt their feelings, but it's like, how's that gonna make me feel if Nick is my boss and I know that the second that I walk into his office, he's gonna grill me about my life to try to figure out his life plan, not out of care for me, but out of figuring out his life plan.
Yeah.
So it's, what intentions are you going into the conversation for? Yes, there can be businessman Nick that needs to be prepared, but be prepared whether, what I would say is like businessman Nick, be prepared as I am person A, and you need to be looking for person B, C, and D to grow your company. And as like friend Nick, ask the questions with good intentions, not to just drive your career forward, but to care for me.
Well,
Go ahead, Maddie. I've talked already.
I guess the other thing I was gonna say, like, I kind of have, I guess, an issue with that question, I guess, being asked, because, I mean, also, like, I don't think it's ever okay to ask, I guess, a woman about, like, if she's planning on having kids, or if, because you don't know their situation, and I think that is a lot of...
Can I ask you something, actually? Because I do want to, while you're on that, like,
Get the mic over there.
well, if woman's having kids, like we mentioned earlier, like if I was your friend, would you feel weird if I asked you, like right now? If we were working together.
I still, I would talk about it with like my best friends, but I still would probably not asking like their, only because like I don't know what, like they could have had a miscarriage, like they could not have kids, like that could be something deeply, something that they're struggling with, and like I just know like if I'm not, but if I was like a person in that situation and I got outside, especially in a work setting, I would totally shut down. And so yeah, that's another reason why I just feel like unless they like, I feel
Unless
like
they offer the information.
Yeah.
I feel like it's totally fair. Like obviously if you're pregnant or if you're planning to have kids and you want to have that conversation with like your boss or whatever, but yeah.
No, you?
Do you want to go?
I feel like it all boils down to communication, like we've kind of been all been saying, but also like how it's been given and how it's received, really broken down. Because like I don't think a boss should ask, because I said that earlier. But I also feel like it is your responsibility to give that information when you do have kids.
Yeah.
I don't think it should be a last minute, hey, I have kids, I'm leaving tomorrow. Bye. It's,
Well, I feel
hey,
like that'd be pretty hard for the girl.
yeah, but at the same time, it's, hey, I'm having kids.
As a responsible professional.
You know, I'm pregnant.
Yeah.
I'm having kids. This is my plan going forward. I want you to work with me. And the boss of any management should accept that and how it is. Not, okay, well, you know, I guess I gotta, you know, figure something out. It's, okay, let's work together. Let's figure out the next plan. Let's figure out the next step. And whether you're accepted to come back or not, that's now that's ball in their court professionally. You know, you could always move somewhere else. You can go to the company, blah, blah, blah. But at the same time, you did your part. You communicated as effectively as you could. And it just comes down to communication.
Yeah.
Let me add something to that, which I can't agree with anymore with what everyone said. I think, right, where this mentality comes in is, right, America's culture is work is family, and that's not how it is. In my opinion. It's, I mean, I love the people I work with, okay, like they're great people.
Yeah.
I'm not saying that. I'm just saying, like, they try to make it like, it's like the most important thing, and it's not. And I think that's where it gets lost in my mind is, so when the boss is asking those questions, he's trying to make work family, in my opinion, or something like that, when it's just, it's gonna work itself out. I mean, like I said, it may not work itself out perfectly. And I'm saying, like, I know at the previous company I was at, they had a guy, so we had 3 airport people who did airport projects. And so there were only 3 people in the company who knew airports. One of them quit within 2 weeks, and then another one just quit this past month. So it's been like a total of like 4 months. Within 4 months, they lost 2 senior people. But you know what? They're gonna find someone else to do it. They'll either hire somebody else, or they'll find a headhunter, and it's going to be all right. There's one guy left. You know, if they lose him, then they may have nothing. But then it's also one of those things. And okay, so now we don't do airports anymore. We're going to pursue drainage. Now, like the company, like companies that's like what the guys who are their boss. That's their role, is to figure that out. That's why they get paid big bucks. So that's my take on it.
Yeah. Anyways, I think there's probably a lot of stuff that, again, if we have anyone listening, if this ever, what's up? You can go ahead and say it probably.
20 minutes.
I'm only showing an hour 5 on mine. Are you wanting to do an hour and a half or 2?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so yeah, we can, obviously we should be respectful of y'all's time. But I think if anyone listens, I think there's a lot on that topic probably unsaid, and so I'm sure there's a ton still to be addressed, but I agree with a lot of what y'all said, and I appreciate a lot of what y'all said.
I want to ask this question.
Oh yeah, go for it, because I have some follow-ups.
Ladies.
Oh wait, are you going totally off?
Yeah, new question.
Okay.
Unless you have something else to say.
No.
New question.
I like it.
All right. Does pay gap exist? Juicy question.
Start this one.
Sorry, Nick.
I don't
Nick
know.
knows.
Yes, all these questions are
Yeah, that's literally what I was gonna say. I was like,
I don't know, but I hope not. I trust the leadership at my company.
I hope so.
So I think the thing with pay gap, where it always confuses me, is like what scale pay gap? Are you talking about if I start at my company and I start at the same exact time as John Doe, is there a pay gap? Or is there like, whenever you look at women and their average salary, and you look at men and like nationally their average salary, is there a pay gap? And if you're looking on like my company, I hope not. I have trust in my leadership. I have trust that they trust me to get the job done no matter my gender. And I trust that they put the best person in that seat so that there should not be a pay gap. Nationally or globally or however you want to look at it, I would venture to guess that there's a pay gap. Not because of lack of women's rights or anything like that, however you want to look at it. I think there are women that choose to stay home. And that means that it is a fulfilling role in their life, but that means that it is unpaid. And that is hard. Yeah. And to do that, the husband has to make enough money to support that. And so there's going to be a salary gap or a pay gap in that role. And then whenever you look at that across the board and you're like, okay, what jobs are women choosing? Okay, if they're choosing more
teaching.
If they're choosing more teaching or secretaries or anything like that, yeah, that's going to make less than the doctors or lawyers or like whatever the jobs that the men are choosing, or even not even on that scale, like from like a trade perspective, whether it's like plumbers or construction workers or things like that. All of that is different across the board no matter the state. And so globally, nationally, yeah, there's a pay gap. That's fine. If there's a pay gap at my job, then there's a problem.
Well, I would say it also depends on like pay gap, right? Like, what if, I'm just gonna use you as an example. What if Alli shows up to late every day?
Oh yeah.
Right? Every day, and then I show up 10 minutes early. I'm getting stuff knocked out, right? Of course, there's gonna be a pay gap.
Yeah.
But like,
it's not gender.
Yeah, it's such a variable question. But I think she's nailed it. Everything that could be said about it.
Yeah, I agree. Because I think the whole kind of reason in writing it down is, I think, and again, my perspective and in my opinion, I think like socially and culturally, a lot of times there's this idea of a pay gap is very much like emphasized, and I think a lot of times like demonized as far as this is bad and we need to fix it. Versus like I would agree with what you said, where it's like when I just I'm drawing a blank on the word, but when I just watched my mom's life and my mom's career, and she would say that now, like there's never been a position in her career where she's made less than her peers, if that makes sense. And she never, I don't know if she took a break when we were kids, but in her, so I'm sitting there and saying, okay, like she's obviously generationally different than us, and that wasn't around. And so it's like, I'd agree with you, a lot of what you said, where it's like, I think there are a lot of factors that play into what we typically like would consider the pay gap, and a lot of people, in my opinion, don't account for those factors. Like you said,
Or they're not defining terms.
or they're not defining terms. If there's a situation where you have person A, person B, and everything is equal except for their gender, and there's a difference in money, I would agree, and like that to me that's wrong. I just my hypothesis would be that doesn't exist very often, especially now, but it's still treated as if it does, and that bothers me, if that makes sense. I don't know if that's right. That would just be my what I
What do you think it's treated as if it does?
What's that?
If you feel like that's the perception on that it's automatically assumed that it's because of gender.
I feel like there's still just like a driving like social, not norm or taboo or I don't know what I'm looking for. There's like a driving social perspective that we're still living in like the 1920s, and it's like I think a lot of people don't. I don't know, they would still view like, hey, women now are still just so mistreated, etc. And I'm sitting here saying that maybe I'm not a woman, but I'm looking at it, it's like, it doesn't seem like it. And I think that, I don't know if that makes sense. That's kind of where I'm,
I think that's something that's like, I haven't thought about, maybe it's just me, I haven't thought about gender pay gap ever. And so I don't know if I'm the anomaly there where it's like, oh, I haven't thought about it. Like, I've only thought about it because you've asked me about it, if I'm being honest. And so I don't know, I'm the anomaly. Somebody else can speak to it. But also it's like both my parents worked, all those things. So it's like my mom has her master's degree, my dad does not. And so it's like pay gap wasn't the thing because like, they had different jobs and they brought in different money, and maybe that was different from society, but it was fine.
I just had another
She sat down, so
I have a final question.
Final question. We still have
No, it's gonna be a final question.
Oh gracious.
Bring the hammer.
In the Bible, the word submit is used.
Oh, I like this. I love this.
Are we closing on this?
I want to close on
Yes,
this.
let's do it. I love this.
What do you view as that women should submit to their husbands or wives should submit to their husbands?
So first let's do a round table and let's, again, I think this goes into just general gender roles. Really quick, without any discussion, what is each person's perspective on whether your primary driver is the Bible or whether it's elsewhere? Like what do gender roles kind of mean to you?
I think we're all coming from the Bible perspective.
Okay, so then just bounce around really quickly. Like, how does that? Because I think
I was throwing this question so I could go sit back down and watch. So,
you can't just throw us a bomb and get out of here.
I disagree with that one.
Okay, fine. Throw the hard one out there. Yeah, I was gonna throw the hard one and then just go sit down. The gender roles. I'll let Cole start so I can just say I agree and then continue on.
Okay.
I
absolutely love this question. So for me, this goes back to what we were talking about as roles as what God sets forth, right? So I'm gonna use the man's role first, right? So the man in the Bible is to be like Christ, right? So much that he should die for her, right? And it talks about women as weaker vessels, right? And all that stuff, which is honestly, sounds extremely negative. Submission is like a huge negative.
Yeah.
Out of context.
Yeah, right. Feeling word. And I think if a man is doing his role right and he is wanting to die for you, right? Like, and I'm not saying like because he loves you and because he's really serving you. Of course you're gonna submit to him, right? Does that make sense? Just like I would submit to Christ because he gave his life for me. There's no question that I would submit to him. So it should really be an easy thing and it should be a very smooth thing. Now, not every guy does that role perfectly, so submission is a hard thing. But I think
no guy does it perfectly.
Yeah, there you go. Thank you. He said no guy does it perfectly. So, but I think that's where the answer comes from. Is ultimately back to the leadership. I think guys don't lead enough, and if we were doing our role right, you guys wouldn't have an issue with submitting to us, or you wouldn't feel like it is a problem.
I think while y'all pass it, I think I agree with a lot of that, where it's like when that's talked about biblically, I think the one verse that's missed all the time is the verse right before that is submit to one another out of reverence for Christ. And so you've got, like, leading into it, the whole idea is y'all both have times and places where, like you let it off the very beginning, talking about different strengths and different moments of leadership. And so I think that the lead off is hey, y'all are going to have times and places where as husband and wife, like, we've had this the past couple weeks, for like 1 week, like Emily's super, super busy and stressed out, and so I'm gonna have to really step up and try and like serve her well. And on another week, I may be really, really busy and stressed out. She's gonna have to step up and serve her well. And then, like you said, then it does, the next kind of portion of the passage, to me, clearly does like lay out separate roles. And again, I think I would agree with almost everything you would say, where it's like, if it is done correctly, I think men have a really, really high calling that I think a lot of men don't step up to, because it's really hard.
It's stressful too.
Yeah, and women have a very, very high calling that is slightly different. And so, again, this is weird because for me, in my household, like, my mom and my dad were both always working. My mom's very, very, like, what a lot of people consider like a strong woman, very opinionated. And so, like, a lot of people look at that and be like, oh, that doesn't take place in your household. I'm like, no, it's just, I don't know, like, the vision you have of submission in your head is, I don't think, like, what I ever experienced. Like, I think my parents did a really good job where it's like they worked together. My dad helped with chores around the house. If he was making decisions, he was involving my mom in decisions and stuff like that. So it's like, but at the same time, like, my dad was the head of the household, and he's like, I don't know how to describe it. It's like, and I don't know. You did I'm just rambling. You did a much better job describing it. I think I would agree generally with what Cole said.
Go ahead, Alli.
Yeah, get to me next. The single person at the table. So Cole teed it up really well, talking about, okay, if marriage is supposed to be a mirroring of Christ's relationship with the church, Christ died for the church. And, like, kind of go back to it, why would you not want to submit to that? And I think the submission word is very hard because it's just, like, contextually with the way that it's perceived, it's kind of like the same word as consequence. It's always perceived negatively. There are good and bad consequences, but whenever I think consequence, I'm like, oh, that was bad. And so whenever I think of whenever I think of submission, I'm like, oh, that means that my freedom is getting taken away. Yeah. But whenever I look at Christianity, I am more free in Christ because I was a slave to my sin. Yeah. And so I am now a slave to Christ instead of being a slave to my sin, and now I have freedom. That doesn't mean that sin is getting away, but that means that I have freedom that I never have experienced before. Yeah. And so coming as the token single person at this table, submission scares the heck out of me because I've lived these past 25 years of life single, so whole. And so I have fought with the Lord daily of like, hey, what does it look like to submit to you? And that's been hard already. So to add a human that's going to do it imperfectly in my life, I'm like, that's nerve-wracking. Yeah. And so whenever that comes to that's a lot of dependence on the Lord now and singleness. And so that's a whole other thing whenever it's like, okay, now I'm dependent on this imperfect human that is supposed to be like Christ and is going to fall short. And I still have to submit. Yeah, it's true. I still have to follow.
That's why it's important to know who you're going to marry.
Yes. That's why I'm not married. And so I think the other piece of that is that the mirroring of it is so sweet is because whenever we look at the Bible and we look at the stories of God's people, they do not follow God well. And then post-Christ, they did not follow the message of Christ well, right? And so whenever I think of the way that I imperfectly submit to Christ in my singleness, I'm like, oh, thank God for grace. Yeah. Thank God for redemption. Thank God for mercy because I don't do it well. And so I think it's so sweet that the church laid out for us in history, whether it's recent history or whether it's in the Bible, they fight God for that power, right? In the same way that I will most likely fight my husband for that leadership power. Like, I want to be in charge. Yeah. And I will have to submit. And that is nerve-wracking and scary in the same way that whenever I pray and talk to the Lord and ask ask my community and ask my church, hey, like I need help in this decision-making process, and they point me in a way that I don't want to go, I'm like, that's frustrating because I want to go my way. And wisdom and what I hear from the Lord during prayer and what I'm reading points me another. I'm like, that is frustrating.
Yeah.
And so that is going to be on a whole nother level whenever I have to like not like leave the house and go for a drive because I have to come back home to a husband. And so those are my thoughts. I don't know if I answered the original question.
Yeah,
Those are my
yeah.
thoughts.
You know what I mean?
No, I'll go then.
You sissy.
She's gonna hear all the good points.
Well, I
It was, yeah.
Listen, I pretty much agreed with what y'all said.
We watched the Friends episode last night where Rachel just like is in the book class and then just basically steals Phoebe's ideas.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll be Rachel and still. That is a compliment. I'd love to be Rachel. Anyways, aside.
Sorry, I did not mean to.
Yeah, it just threw me
Yeah.
off in my head. I basically agree with what y'all said. I think in the beginning, especially before we got married, the submission thing always, the connotation of the word just confused me a decent amount, because when I think of someone submitting to someone, I think of more of like royalty, if that makes sense. Like king status, and you're like a peasant.
Being told what to do.
Yeah, being told what to do, and I didn't really understand if that made sense in my mind, and then it would go into a lot of doubt, like, okay, well, why would like a wife need to submit to the husband? And that made me think of like, okay, well then are we second? Like, or what's wrong with us that we would need to submit? But I guess in agreeing with y'all, just to reiterate, like reading back in the verse before that is really important to make sure you understand, is that it's a two-way street, and that it's supposed to resemble the relationship that Christ had with the church, or Christ had with the church. And so, yeah, that's what I'm saying.
And I think that, are we like second best or whatever?
Get over there with that mic.
Sorry. Whenever I think of like the fear of like, oh, am I second? Or like, am I not worth as much as a guy in God's eyes? I don't know. That's a fear that I have had. And so what I've taken solace in is, hey, like, Christ wants me to use my gifts well. And if I have a gift for leadership, or if I have a gift for teaching, or whatever that looks like, a gift for service, and Christ wants me to use it well, I would hope that my husband would as well.
Yeah.
And so I think that's a piece of it where it's like, Christ wants to, like, he gave me these gifts so that I can utilize them for his kingdom. So it's like, I would hope that he would work with me in utilizing them. And so I think that's the piece where I've wrestled with over the past couple of years, is like, hey, like, does God love me? Does God appreciate me for who I am, who he created me to be? And my answer is yes.
Yeah.
Can I add something to this?
Yeah.
So our women's second. I like that idea too. Not to say that our women second.
Yeah.
But
I was like, I don't know.
Or women Muslim, or however you want to word it.
like I think of Moses when he's asked by God to go and save the people, right? And he's like, I can't do that, whatever. And there's several events in the Bible where men are asked by God and they basically make excuses. And then when Mary is asked, what does she say? Asked to be born, like her son when she hasn't had sex, right? And what all that comes with all the scrutiny and whatever, and she just says, yes, I'm your faithful servant. So what I would say biblically, women have never been looked at that way. And second of all, I think of Genesis, right? Like, God saw it was not good for man to be alone.
Mm-hmm.
If you remember that, like, there is a reason why we are meant to be together and we are called one flesh, because you're one. You're not viewed as one is better than the other, or vice versa. You're one in his eyes. So.
Hello. No, I think that kind of, I guess what we've all touched on, like that the word submissive is a scary word.
Yeah.
But like, I was thinking about that, like, I guess while we were all talking too, like, just, I guess with our relationship, like, if there's something, like, I'm always looking to you for what to do. And I'm never, but I think as similarly I think you're looking to me on what to do sometimes too. But I think we could both, like y'all were saying on the verse before, like, I think is really important too. It's like, I guess I wouldn't think of it as submissive, but I guess that it would be kind of like the definitions, like you were saying. It's like you're always looking to your partner on what their thought is and to keep you, I guess, on track. But I don't know if that's the right thing to say. But yeah.
No, I agree. I agree with that.
I hate to be the last one. I'm going to take the last.
Yeah, I just slid in there because I was
But I have a very dry take on this one.
Yeah.
So like, it's my mind just wondering curiously, like, obviously like the Bible is taken from Hebrew and it's a translation. So like any word can be translated, and that goes for anything you ever read. It just depends on how you translate it. So again, like, me being old faithful with communication, like just like jumping back to communication and like literally like thinking about it. To me, it feels like it's a team, and that's what God's always tried to make it. Like what he was saying is like a man is supposed to be with the woman, and is supposed to be like building something to serve for Christ and our Lord, and that like literally like, and I don't know why my brain just like stops there. It's like, okay, that's how I see it. That's where I kind of read it as, and I take other people's opinions and I kind of like put it with my opinion. But at the end of the day, like that's what it means. Like I don't think farther than what I take from it. And that makes sense.
Yeah.
So that's my take.
I like it. Lots of good takes.
Did you get your take?
Sort of at the beginning.
Yes, you did.
I think.
That was the ramble one.
Yeah, I think the only thing I would say to conclude is like, I think they're not to conclude the whole thing, just as my I think that the biggest reason the biggest reason I think that like verse is like looked down upon is just so many people intentionally or unintentionally like misinterpret what's supposed to be going on there. And I was just saying, like, even in our relationship, I think that personality wise, I'm more inclined to abuse my authority or perceived authority, and you're more inclined to just kind of just like go along with it. And so the only thing I'm having to work on is, hey, like,
You're just much more outspoken than I am.
Well,
So
just like
tend
I
to
have just like bossy tendencies, and so it's like it's my job is like I've got to reach out to people who are holding me accountable and basically saying, hey, that's not what this is saying. And it's like you have a role to lead. You don't have a role to boss around and dominate.
Yeah,
And
you
I'm
still do a
saying,
great job. Don't be too harsh on yourself.
thanks. But like on the flip side, whereas like I would push back a hair with like what like you had said is like yes, we are 100% agree as far as we are a team. 100% agree. But I think like tying it back even to what we touched on at the very beginning as far as like if there's this issue with passivity in men, I think that the distinction between what the roles are just as important, because we are a team is a lot easier than, hey, you are to love your wife as Christ loved the church in that he died for her. Where it's like, oh, like, what the hell? How am I supposed to do that? And it's like, that is like every day. Like, even if it's something that I perceive as silly, like I could go play pickleball or golf, and Emily's like, well, man, I could really use your help around the house. And my default is, well, I just want to do this because I want to do it. And then what comes back to is, well, like, how are you, is that leading her well, or is that just you being selfish and doing what you want to do? If that makes sense. Where it's like, I've told this to Tanner and Tam before a lot, where it's like, I feel like almost every area where if we get into an argument or a fight or if something goes wrong, it's like there is always a component that I fell short on as far as I was impatient, I was too like abrasive, like I screwed something up. And it's like that is, I don't know, that's where it's like I find a little bit of comfort in the calling of, hey dude, like own this and take responsibility for it, and like it's on you to an extent. And so I don't know, that's where it's like I don't even know if any of that made sense, but so I would agree almost entirely with what all of y'all said. I agree with like a lot of what you said. That's just kind of are some thoughts.
Well, nice.
Yeah, we're at I think we have more topics. We're at an hour and a half. I know it's late. Perfect. We're wrapping up.
I think we're wrapping up because I
Okay.
think we covered a broad list of questions and I think we're good.
Sweet. Any closing thoughts to anyone, or I would like to wrap it up after that?
Do you guys have any topics that you think someone or we should later on discuss?
Is Android better than Mac?
Okay.
I don't know anything about technology. Clearly, we're recording on two
Now you
separate.
can learn.
We're recording on two separate computers with one microphone. You think I'm gonna be a person to talk about Android and Mac?
Maddie has a
I feel like
Unless
Nick
you can
could have a great podcast on some sports conflicts.
Let's do
Oh,
it.
he already
Like,
wants to do
I
it.
feel like it'd be
against
worked
LeBron
up.
James.
I would die.
I don't know anything about sports ball.
Sports ball?
I don't know nothing.
All right,
Yeah,
well,
so-
thanks for coming,
I
y'all.
was just gonna say again, if we have anyone listening to this, we can always come back if there's any interest in like returning to any of these conversations that we had. I'd love to. I think we could do multiple like hour and a half podcasts on a lot of these follow-ups. If anyone is listening and there's anything that any of us said that was off base or that you disagree with, or that just like
Comment below.
comment, send me messages, we'll figure it out. But yeah, appreciate everyone listening. Thank y'all so much for coming and just taking time out of y'all's night. It's late, so love y'all and thanks for joining.